Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Sebbing. One of my most popular patterns is a sock monkey baby quilt, and I know that sometimes it is difficult to find all those fabrics, so I finally gotten some kits together that you guys can purchase on my website, so you don't have to go searching in order to recreate that look. So I'm also going to teach you how to use Fusible web to do Fusible applique. It's a really quick process. You don't have to turn under any edges. You just sort of trace the pattern onto the paper part of it, cut it out, and fuse it in place with an iron, and then you can just stitch around and you're done. And you can stitch with the sewing machine, so it goes really quickly. You can use this technique for any applique pattern, but I'm going to show you how to do it using the monkey that I have. And I have printed it out on blue paper, so it's a little bit easier to see for you guys at home, but you can use just regular printer paper when you are working on this. So let's get started. So whenever you work with an applique pattern, the pieces are numbered according to the order that you're supposed to put them on the background piece. And that's so that you don't have any pieces that are overlapping that shouldn't be. So like for example, this ear piece, you put the big ear part down, then the inner ear, and then you put a whole bunch of other pieces down, and then at the very end you're going to put the head, this little eyebrow piece, and then the hat pieces. So what you want to do when you use Fusible applique is you want to note the pieces, they're the parts that should be underneath, because you're going to need to cut those about 1/4 inch longer past, so that there's something to sort of go underneath this. So what I like to do is just put a little X in the places where I know that it needs to be a little longer. So like for example, for this 18 and 19, this edge is going to be on top of this body, so I don't need to put an X here, but this top edge here is going to need to go underneath piece 19, so I'm going to put an X here, and same with the top of 19. The bottom part is going to be on top of 18, so this is just going to be a nice finished edge, but up here it's going to need to be underneath piece 20, and same with the top of the hat, and then 21 is our final piece, so you're not going to need to put anything underneath there. So you're going to want to make sure and just X the sides that need to go underneath something. So like for example, 7, 10, 13, and 16, those all are going to go on top of the pieces that go before it, because you have 14 and 15 for the parts of the leg, and then this little cuff here is going to sit on top of both of those. So we won't have to mark anything on those, but we do want to mark the pieces to the sides of it. And in the case of these legs, both of the sides are going to go underneath something else, so we're going to want to extend on both sides. So once you've gone ahead and marked where you need to extend it a little bit, then you can go ahead and grab some paper scissors, and you can start cutting out the pieces, and you want to cut right on that line on every single piece. So don't worry about leaving an excess edge. We're going to draw that back when we get to the Fusible web. So I'm going to trust that you guys know how to cut on the line. That's a pretty basic skill. We all learned it in elementary school. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then we're going to come back once all the pieces are cut out. So I cut up all my pieces, and I also arranged them according to what color fabric they're going to ultimately go on. So I have all my whites in one area, all my brown sweaters in another, my red sweaters in another area. And that will help, because when we do this method, when you finish with the fabric, it kind of looks like Swiss cheese. So by keeping it all together, we can keep it together when we trace it onto the Fusible web, which helps you waste less fabric, which is always a good thing, so then you have a little bit more for your next project. So I use Heat and Bond Light. I really like it, and it comes on these rolls, which is better than getting it folded up in a package, because then you're not going to have some built-in folds on it. So I'm going to go ahead and move these out of the way so that I can unroll this. And not all applique methods are like this, but when you use Fusible, you're going to end up getting a mirror image of what you're tracing. So whenever you put a piece down, you want to make sure that you flip it to the wrong side. So you're going to see the back side of your paper. So you're not going to see any of the markings that we have on there. So now what you're going to do is you're going to carefully trace around your shape, and then if it's one where you have an X, go ahead and flip that over, and then you just want to extend that along the area where the X is by about 1/4 of an inch. And it's not critical that it's exactly 1/4 of an inch. You just want to make sure that you've got a little bite of fabric so that there's something for the piece that goes on top of that to adhere to, so you don't have extra raw edges sticking out where you don't want them. So you're going to want to go ahead and do that for all your pieces. Make sure you flip them over to the wrong side, trace them, and then if there is extra fabric that you need to draw on for the fusible web to grab onto for the next piece, go ahead and extend that line a little bit. And another helpful tip is once we get all this cut up, it's going to be kind of hard to tell what's what because all the hands kind of look the same and all the legs kind of look the same. So I would put just a little number along the edge of one of the lines, and you want it along the edge because our next step we're going to window this applique, and that means we're going to cut out the center of it. It helps make the piecing a little bit more flexible and easier to work with when we get to stitching around to hide all those raw edges. So I finished tracing all the pieces, and now I need to window them, which means I'm going to cut out the inside of the fusible web, and that helps make everything a little bit easier to work with and a little bit more flexible when the quilt is done. So to do this, you want a pair of embroidery scissors or detail scissors like these. These are spring-loaded, so they're really nice if you have issues with your hands. And what you want to do is you kind of want to just fold the piece over and give a cut in the center. Then you want to get out to the edge of the piece about 1/4 of an inch away. Again, it doesn't have to be exact, you can eyeball that. And then you just want to trim out the inside of the piece, taking care not to trim out that number that we put on there, so that way you still know what piece is what. And when you're dealing with pieces that have that extra piece, or the extra little bit that we added onto it for the overlap, you can go ahead and cut right up to that overlap line, because you don't need to have extra on the inside of it. You just really need about 1/4 of an inch on the edge of each line. Now it's time to take the pieces that we have traced and windowed and actually fuse it to the fabric. Now you're going to want to make sure that it's free of wrinkles, because once this stuff is down, it's down. So if you have a wrinkle in it, you're always going to have a wrinkle in it. So make sure you give it a good press. And then we're going to be pressing this fusible applique or fusible web to the wrong side of the fabric. So it's really easy to accidentally fuse it to the right side, and then you have to start all over. So make sure that you take your time and make sure that you're working with the wrong side of the fabric. Then you just want to lay your fabric piece down, and following the instructions for the fusible web, you want to set your iron to those settings and go ahead and fuse that down. I always use the hot setting for cotton on mine, and that seems to work pretty well for me. Then go ahead and let it cool while you do your other pieces to the other fabrics that we use to make this applique sock monkey. And once it has cooled sufficiently, then you can go ahead and cut it out. You want to cut right exactly on those lines that we drew, making sure that you're still leaving that extra area so that there's a little bit of overlap when we go ahead and put the monkey together. So go ahead and do that for all your pieces, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put the monkey together. So when we get to actually putting the applique together, when you use fusible web, once you fuse it to the background, that's it. It's not coming back up again. So what I find is helpful when we're working with a piece that has so many pieces to it like this one is using an applique pressing sheet. Sometimes these are also called Teflon pressing sheets. What it allows you to do is assemble the entire applique on it, and then you're able to lift it off and then put it in place. So let me show you how that works. So when you're working with a Teflon pressing sheet or an applique pressing sheet, you want to lay it directly on top of your piece or your pressing surface. And then you want to take the backing off of your pieces, because we don't need it anymore because we're going to fuse at this point. So in this case, I'm going to be putting my arm together, and I want these to be kind of close, and then I want my red band to go over it. And it's kind of nice to have your applique diagram, a second copy of it, hanging around when you're doing this. Kind of helps you act as a visual guide to get everything where you want it to be. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with this placement. I've got my little hand, my armband, and my arms here. And I'm going to go ahead and just set the iron down on top of that for a second or two and let that fuse. Now I'm going to let it cool. I don't want to pull it up right away. You can fuse a few other pieces while you wait for that to cool. But once it has cooled, you will be able to pull it up and reposition it later. So let me show you exactly how this works for being able to put together pieces and then like an arm, a leg, a head here, and with this one here while that cools. So I've got an ear here, and I've already put together my head, and I was able to pull it right up off the pressing sheet once it cooled, because I have used this and it has that nice sticky surface. So I can go ahead and line that up until I'm happy with the placement, and do the same thing for the ear on this side. And turn that ear in just a smidge, and you know, you really can have fun with this and kind of make it your own, where exactly you want those ears to be. You just want to make sure there's enough overlap to really catch it so that you won't have a frayed edge sticking out somewhere. So now I've already put together my ears by themselves and the head. So now I can go ahead and get that seam with the iron. And now my entire head is together, and I don't have to worry about it not working together or being in the right spot. And let me show you how you can just peel this up once you get it all together. You just kind of let it cool, and then sort of peel it gently with your fingernail. And then you're able to peel up the appendage and put it down later in another spot, and that fusible applique will still work. So go ahead and get all your limbs together, and then I'm going to show you how to put the entire monkey together and put it on your background piece. Alright, so I've got all my limbs and my head assembled, so now it's time to get it on the body. And this is the point where you can still do like a little bit at a time if you want, or you can just try and get it all in place and hit it with one shot, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm just placing my limbs in place under the body, and then I'm going to put my head on top. I'm going to do a little bit of finagling here to get that arm where I want it to be. Then once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to hit the top end of this so that the bottom is still free to fit those legs underneath. So now my bottom is still free. I can still get the legs where I want them to be. And again, it's helpful to keep your assembly diagram, a second copy of it, that you didn't cut up nearby, so that you have a nice visual reference while you're working with this. Alright, now I'm happy with that, so I'm going to put the iron down. Get that in place. So now I've assembled my entire monkey, and now I'm going to let this cool, and then I'm going to remove it carefully, and then I'm going to adhere it to my background piece. Alright, the hard work is now done. Now I just have to kind of center this on my background piece, and I don't ever really like measure exactly. What I kind of do is I put my hands on either side, and if I have about the same distance of my fingers on the sides and then on the top and the bottom, It just needs to come down just a smidge. Then that's where I put it. And once you're happy with where it is on the background piece, then you can just run your iron over it. And you want to hold it in place as you go over to really help that fuse down, because we've been manhandling this quite a bit as we have put it on the applique pressing sheet and taken it off several times. So it's probably going to take quite a bit of heat to get on your background piece here. But we're also going to be stitching it down. So if you have a piece that's just being stubborn and not getting where it needs to be, don't worry, you will be okay. We have one final step until this is all done. We need to secure the edges of this fusible applique. You can use any stitch that goes over the edge of the fabric, so you can really have fun with your decorative stitches, but some popular options are a zigzag stitch, a satin stitch, and a buttonhole, which is what I'm going to be using here. And I'm using an open toe applique foot for this. It has a little U opening in the center and it's clear, so it's really easy to see where your needle is, so that it makes it a little easier to go around this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use in this case, just a dark brown thread to go around everything. I find it really helps outline the piece, but you could also get matching thread for each of the edges, or you could go with a monofilament clear thread if you like to. So what I'm going to do is I'm putting my needle down on the edge of the stitch, or the edge of the fabric, and then I'm just going to slowly go around each piece, and I'll give you a close-up so you can see what this looks like. And whenever you have to stop and reposition, you want to make sure you do it with a needle on the outside of the applique piece. And for this step, it's just best to go slow. I know sometimes on these tutorials I kind of zoom through things, but for something like this, I just go nice and slow, so that way the threads don't end up where they're not supposed to be, and I just get a nice outline stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and outline every single piece of applique with the buttonhole stitch. You should do the same at home, and then I'll come back and show you the finished piece. Well, I finished stitching all around, and it gives a nice outline look to my applique piece. I really like how it really separates the pieces, both from the different fabrics and the similar ones, to really show all the work you did in putting this together. But it really wasn't that bad because we used Fusible for the entire process. So it went pretty quick, especially if you compare doing all this by hand. So that's how you do Fusible applique using Fusible Web. If you like this pattern, you can download it on my website, quiltaddictsanonymous.com. It's called the Sock Monkey Crib Quilt. And I also have kits available for this quilt. And thank you for following along. I'm Stephanie Sebbing. Happy quilting!